Welcome to the channel. If this is your first time, put on your headphones and take a deep breath. Because Dr. Isabella Clarke thought she was alone when the doors closed on the 40th floor of Chicago's most exclusive medical tower, she was wrong. When Alessandro Torretti stepped in, the enigmatic Italian businessman whose influence extends far beyond what appears in any corporate filing, the air became charged with a tension she'd been trying to ignore. She'd been avoiding his calls, declining his invitations, pretending she didn't feel the attraction whenever their paths crossed. But when the elevator suddenly stopped between floors, she realized there was nowhere left to hide from the conversation that could change everything. Subscribe now to discover what happens when moral boundaries blur in the most compelling ways, and sometimes the most important negotiations happen when you're trapped between floors. The elevator doors slid shut with their familiar whisper as Isabella pressed the parking garage button, finally allowing herself to breathe after 16 hours of surgery. The heart transplant had been successful, but complex cases like that always left her emotionally drained, running on caffeine and determination. She leaned against the polished steel wall, closing her eyes for just a moment as the elevator began its descent. 42nd floor, 41st. Each number brought her closer to her car, to home, to the glass of wine and hot bath that represented the only luxury she allowed herself after days like this. The elevator stopped abruptly on the 36th floor, and her eyes snapped open. When the doors opened, Alessandro Torretti stepped in and the air changed, not through ostentation, but in the way he occupied space with natural authority. The charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, outlined a strong body without apparent effort, as if elegance were just another extension of his instinct. His dark hair, slicked back, revealed a face sculpted by firm lines and absolute control, but it was his eyes that disarmed. Brown, intense, with that rare balance between warmth and danger. A man who could be gentle, but who clearly wasn't accustomed to hearing no. And yet there was something almost reverent in the way he observed her, as if he'd already decided she deserved more than the rest of the world. Dr. Clarke. His voice carried that slight Italian accent that made her name sound like music. I was hoping I might run into you. She'd noticed before how people reacted to his presence, the subtle deference of hospital administrators, the way conversations quieted when he entered a room, the specific kind of respect that couldn't be bought with charitable donations alone. He didn't need to explain himself, didn't need to say something twice. He was a man respected and in certain ways feared, but he never intimidated her. Never. With her, Alessandro was different. Each encounter seemed like a small event, discreet to the world, intense for both of them. There was respect in every gesture, silent admiration in the way he observed her, and attention that didn't need words to exist. His breathing changed when he approached, slower, deeper, and then came the greeting, 2 soft kisses on her cheeks, typically Italian, except in the brief brush of his warm lips against her skin. There was something that went beyond formality. His scent lingered in the air for precious seconds too long, too close. With everyone else, Alessandro was firm, serious, almost impenetrable. But with her, there was a contained delicacy, as if he were always one step away from losing control, and yet chose not to lose it. Mr. Torretti. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, barely noticing the floor numbers descending. Working late. As are you. He approached her, greeted her as usual, and stood beside her. Though I suspect your motives are more altruistic than mine, he said. She smiled discreetly and noticed a slight smile on his face that suggested amusement at some private joke. What kind of business keeps you here at this hour? The type of negotiation that requires personal attention. The pause was minimal but loaded with intention. As always, he said enough to intrigue, never enough to reveal. Some conversations weren't meant to happen in daylight, he completed in a low tone. The elevator continued descending in silence, 32nd, 31st, and with each number that disappeared from the panel, Isabella felt her own awareness become dangerously acute. It wasn't just the proximity, It was the way he occupied space without invading it. The way the air seemed denser around him. Alessandro didn't seek attention. He simply altered the environment. And the most unsettling thing wasn't the power he carried. It was how, even so, he chose to turn his eyes only to her. He was also the type of man whose real business remained mysteriously undefined, despite his obvious wealth and influence. "I believe my assistant informed yours that I don't usually go out with people I know from the hospital," she said carefully. She did. Very professionally, I might add. His tone was affectionate, with what seemed like genuine appreciation. "Though I noticed you didn't say you weren't interested, just that you weren't available." Heat crept up her neck at his perceptiveness. "Is there a difference?" "Usually." He shifted slightly, and she became extremely aware of the confined space, the way his presence seemed to make the elevator feel both larger and more intimate at the same time. Though I suppose that depends on why a brilliant surgeon would avoid someone who clearly appreciates her work. Maybe I'm just cautious about complicated associations. Something flickered in his expression. Perhaps amusement, perhaps recognition. "Wise," he murmured. "Though I've discovered that the most rewarding relationships tend to be the most complicated ones." He took a step forward. It wasn't an abrupt movement. It was deliberate. Calculated. The proximity made the air seem smaller, warmer. If she lifted her face just a few centimeters, she'd feel his breath touch her skin. And when she finally dared to look up, she found those eyes fixed on her, not rushed, not hungry, but decided. As if he wasn't trying to convince her, as if he were waiting for her to realize, on her own, that she'd already chosen. 26th floor, 25th. Why was this elevator moving so slowly, she thought. "I prefer my complications in the operating room," she said. "Do you really?" His voice carried a tone of gentle challenge. "Because from what I've observed, you seem to prefer safety over complexity in all other areas of your life." The accuracy of his assessment caught her off guard. She'd expected more corporate politeness, more carefully worded proposals about hospital partnerships, not this immediate disarming honesty. "Careful, Alessandro, too much confidence is often mistaken for arrogance. It's a matter of observation. I would never be arrogant with you." His smile was self-aware, almost melancholic. "I built my career understanding what motivates people's decisions, and every time we've been in the same room, you've been very careful to maintain professional distance. Maybe I just don't mix work with other things." He let out a small smile, almost imperceptible. "Maybe." He shrugged as if that didn't affect him, but his gaze remained steady on her. "Or maybe you're just not sure what to do when someone doesn't fit so easily into your safe zone." She frowned slightly. "Safe zone? You like control, knowing where you're stepping." His voice was calm, not accusatory. "And I am not exactly predictable." Her pulse quickened at his words. He wasn't denying the implications, wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. But he wasn't confirming anything either. "Do you always talk so much about yourself?" His laugh was low, easy. "Only when I'm trying to get the attention of the most interesting woman in this building." She didn't look away. "And you think you're succeeding?" He took an almost imperceptible step forward. "I prefer when attention comes naturally." The silence between them grew denser. "Well, that's very diplomatic," she said. But the truth got stuck in her throat. The truth was that he'd been destabilizing her from the first moment, since the day their eyes met in that conference room during the presentation of the month's surgical results. She was still a resident, nervous, focused, and he watched her as if he already knew exactly who she would become. Alessandro wasn't young like many of the businessmen who circulated at the hospital's charity events. At 42, he carried something few of them possessed, not just money, but presence, experience, control. He was an investor, advisor, strategic philanthropist when it came to new hospital wings or cutting-edge technology. He knew how to speak with doctors, administrators, and politicians with the same elegant ease. But there was something beyond the titles. The Toretti surname had weight, old Italian, too respected to be just another name on golden plaques and financial reports. She'd never had proof of anything, just a persistent feeling that behind the impeccable courtesy and tailored suits there existed a man accustomed to negotiating in territories where influence was worth more than contracts. And perhaps that was precisely what made her observe him with such caution, or with such interest. The corner of his mouth lifted. Diplomacy is useful. His eyes briefly dropped to her lips before returning to her gaze. But when I'm interested in someone, I tend to be quite direct. 18th floor. 17th. The elevator seemed smaller with each passing moment, charged with a tension she could no longer pretend didn't exist. "So what do you want from me, Mr. Toretti?" "Alessandro," he corrected gently. "And what I want is surprisingly simple. Dinner, conversation, the opportunity to discover if this tension between us is as compelling outside hospital conference rooms." Before she could respond, the elevator lurched to a sudden stop between the 15th and 14th floors. The lights flickered once, then dimmed to emergency mode, bathing everything in warm amber shadows. "How convenient," she said dryly, though her heart was racing. "Sometimes the universe provides opportunities for conversations that might otherwise be postponed indefinitely." His tone suggested he might have had something to do with the timing, but he neither confirmed nor denied it. She tilted her head slightly. "And if I prefer to have these conversations in public places, with clearly visible exits?" A half smile emerged. "You're a bit intimidating, Mr. Toretti." That wasn't exactly the word she wanted to use. Enchanting would have been more honest, but she would never admit that. He smiled, not at all offended. "Then you're smarter than most people I deal with." His gaze became more attentive. "But it also means you're used to keeping a door open, always ready to leave before the conversation gets too real." The silence that settled between them was brief, but loaded. The amber emergency lighting gave everything a feeling of intimacy, of isolation from the outside world, in a way that was both disturbing and strangely appealing. She could see more clearly the sharp angles of his face, the way he carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his presence respected. "What makes you think I'm running away?" "Because every time the conversation starts getting interesting, you look for the nearest exit." His voice was low, calm. "It's not fear." His eyes remained locked on hers. "It's control." The silence grew thick. "You like to decide when something starts and when it ends, Dr. Isabella." She found herself studying his face, looking for clues about the man behind the carefully composed exterior. His suit was clearly expensive, his watch probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, and there was something in the way he moved that suggested physical capability beyond what most businessmen possessed. "Are you dangerous, Alessandro?" The directness of her question seemed to surprise him, and for a moment his composed mask slipped to reveal something more genuine. "That depends entirely on your definition of dangerous," he said finally. "I don't harm innocent people. I don't create unnecessary conflicts. But I also don't allow threats to people or things I value to go unaddressed." That's not exactly an answer. It's the most honest answer I can give you without knowing whether you're asking out of curiosity or concern. The emergency lighting cast shadows that danced across his features, and she realized that this conversation, trapped in an elevator with a man whose exact nature remained deliberately mysterious, should probably frighten her more than it actually did. Instead, she found herself leaning slightly forward, drawn by the magnetic pull of his presence. What if it's both? His expression softened, and she caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath the controlled exterior. "Then I'd say you wouldn't need to worry about anything if you accepted dinner with me someday. And as for your curiosity, it can be satisfied gradually, in homeopathic doses, as long as you don't decide to run away halfway through." "I don't usually run away," she said, already bitterly regretting the impulsive response. "Isabella." The way he pronounced her first name, with that slight musicality that made it sound like something precious, made her pulse quicken. "May I ask you something?" 12th floor, 11th. The elevator seemed to be moving again, though she hadn't heard any mechanical sounds indicating it had been repaired. "What? What kind of life are you living if avoiding all possible complications is your main goal?" The question hit closer to home than she wanted to admit. A safe one. Safe, perhaps, but is it fulfilling? She thought about her carefully structured existence. Work, home, the occasional professional conference or medical journal. Predictable, controlled, free from the messy entanglements that seem to complicate other people's lives. It's enough. Is it? He moved closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth, could see the golden flecks in his brown eyes. Or is it simply familiar? The elevator chimed softly as it reached the parking level, and the doors slid open to reveal the familiar concrete and fluorescent lights of the parking garage. But neither of them moved to exit. "Alessandro, have dinner with me." His voice was quiet but insistent. One evening, real conversation, excellent wine, food that doesn't come from a hospital vending machine. "I don't date men whose business I don't understand." "Then ask me questions. Get to know me well enough to decide whether understanding my business matters more than understanding who I am." The offer was tempting and terrifying in equal measure. She could see the parking garage waiting beyond the elevator doors, her normal life, her safe routines, her carefully maintained boundaries, or she could step into whatever unknown territory Alessandro Torretti represented. "One dinner," she heard herself say. His smile was slow, warm, tinged with satisfaction and something deeper. "Friday night, I'll pick you up at 7. I can meet you at the restaurant. Isabella." The way he said her name stopped her mid-step as she moved toward the parking garage. "Let me do this properly. Let me show you what it's like when someone wants to take care of you for an evening. I'll pick you up at 7 if you'll allow me, of course." The promise in his voice sent warmth spiraling through her, and she realized that somewhere between the 40th floor and the parking garage, she'd made a choice that felt both inevitable and dangerously tempting. 7 o'clock, she agreed. There was a brief silence before she asked, feigning lightness, "Should I wear something specific?" "Wear something that makes you feel beautiful," he said, walking toward an elegant black Maserati that somehow perfectly suited him. "Though I should warn you, you could show up in jeans and a t-shirt and still be the most stunning woman anywhere." As she watched him drive away, Isabella realized that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to something that had nothing to do with surgery schedules or patient care. And for once, the prospect of stepping outside her carefully controlled life seemed more exciting than frightening. Friday evening arrived with the kind of nervous energy Isabella hadn't felt since her residency interviews. She'd chosen a navy blue dress with thin straps that struck the perfect balance between elegance and approachability. Sophisticated enough for wherever Alessandro planned to take her, but not so formal that she felt like she was playing a role. At exactly 7 o'clock, her building's intercom buzzed. When she stepped outside, Alessandro was waiting beside his Maserati, and she felt her breath catch. He was stunning in a navy suit that perfectly matched her dress, a detail that suggested either sharp intuition or meticulous planning. "You look incredible," he said, moving to open the passenger door for her with old-world courtesy that somehow made him even more charming and enchanting. "Thank you." She slipped into the car, immediately aware of the luxury surrounding her. Leather that probably cost more than most people's furniture, technology she'd only seen in magazines, the subtle scent of expensive cologne mingling with new car smell. "I thought I'd take you somewhere we could actually talk," he said as they pulled into Chicago traffic. "One of my favorite places, small, quiet, and discreet." "Discreet?" His smile was enigmatic. "I imagined you'd feel more comfortable without an audience, or curious looks from the hospital." And he was right. The whispers would be inevitable. Alessandro wasn't just one of the main partners. He was wealthy, influential, and the type of man who naturally attracted interest wherever he went. Women noticed, men respected. and Isabella knew she wouldn't be the only one who would accept that invitation without hesitation. Still, he had invited her. The restaurant was tucked away in a part of the city she rarely visited, not exactly hidden, but the type of place you needed to know about to find. No ostentatious signage, just a brass plaque and a valet who clearly recognized Alessandro immediately. Inside, the atmosphere was intimate without being cramped, elegant without being pretentious, the kind of place where powerful people could conduct business without attracting attention, where privacy was assumed rather than requested. They were seated at a corner table with soft lighting, and enough distance from other diners to ensure their conversation would remain private. Alessandro ordered wine with the easy confidence of someone who understood both quality and personal preference, somehow selecting something that perfectly complemented both their tastes. "Tell me about your work," Isabella said once they'd settled in. "Your real work, not the diplomatic version you gave me in the elevator." His laugh was genuinely amused. "Direct, I appreciate that. In my profession, clarity can be the difference between life and death. I've learned to value honesty. And in mine, clarity can be complicated." He swirled the wine in his glass, considering his words. "I solve problems for people who can't solve them through conventional channels." "What kind of problems?" The corner of his mouth lifted, as if the question were predictable. "The kind that aren't interesting enough to compete with this dinner." She tilted her head. "So you're not going to answer?" He leaned forward just enough to close the distance between them. "I'm already answering." His gaze remained steady. "I'd rather use this time to find out why you seem so fascinated when you pretend you're not." The silence that followed was brief, but loaded. "Do you always change the subject when the question starts getting uncomfortable?" she teased. "Only when the more interesting subject is sitting right in front of me." Before he could notice her face turning red, the waiter appeared with the first course, too delicate to be just food, assembled with almost artistic precision. She looked away for a moment, taking advantage of the interruption. When she looked back at him, she studied his features more carefully. Everything he said could sound perfectly legitimate, the type of discourse that fit in boardrooms and annual reports. And yet, there was something in the pauses, in the calculated silences, in the way he chose exactly what to reveal and what not to. "How did you get into this line of work?" He laughed low. "And yet you keep asking." "Ah, Bella, you're intriguing. That's what I like most about you." Before she insisted once more, he yielded, partially. "Let's say it's a family business." The pause was brief. "My father always believed that in Chicago, some situations require a different kind of skill." He didn't elaborate. "I grew up hearing that reputation is worth more than force, and that sometimes the best solution is the one nobody needs to discuss afterward." She observed him. "And your father?" His smile changed, less strategic, more personal. "Retired, in Naples, finally enjoying what he built." A second of silence. "He'd be pleased to know I learned to choose my priorities well." His gaze rested on her when he said this. Before she could ask anything more, her phone buzzed with a message from the hospital. She glanced at it automatically, a habit ingrained by years of being on call. "Emergency?" Alessandro asked, noting her attention to the phone. "No, just a colleague asking about a patient consultation." She put the phone away, feeling guilty about the interruption. "I'm sorry. I don't usually—" "Please." His voice was gentle, understanding. "Your work saves lives. I would never ask you to ignore something so important. Most men find the interruptions annoying. Most men feel threatened by women who have important work to do." He leaned back slightly, studying her face. "I find it remarkable that you've built such a brilliant career. Why would I want you to be less dedicated to something so meaningful?" The acceptance in his voice, the way he seemed to genuinely admire the very qualities that had complicated other relationships, made her feel something she hadn't experienced in years. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he picked up the wine bottle the waiter had left on the table and gently tilted it over her glass, dispensing with any external help. The gesture was simple, but there was something deliberate in the way his fingers held the neck, as if he wanted to take that small care personally. "I've never felt threatened by strong women," he said, not looking directly at her, concentrated on the fine line of wine filling the crystal. "Maybe because I grew up surrounded by them." He set the bottle down calmly. "My mother ran our house like a silent general. My older sister always knew exactly what she wanted." A half smile emerged. "And for a time I thought I wanted to be a doctor." His eyes finally met hers. "I liked the idea of saving someone with my own hands." The pause wasn't dramatic. It was honest. But some families have traditions that are hard to ignore. He held her hand for a moment, as if the gesture had begun without him realizing it. His fingers slid slowly over hers, not squeezing, just feeling, before moving up her forearm, tracing the delicate curve to her shoulder. It wasn't a hurried touch. It was a line drawn with intention. When his hand finally rested there, warm against the dress strap, her breathing was no longer completely under control. "Courage is a rare quality," he murmured, close enough for his voice to touch her skin before the air did. The waiter returned to clear the plates and present the main course, giving her time to process what he'd said and done. Alessandro's work clearly operated in moral grey areas, but he seemed to have boundaries, principles that guided his decisions. "What was the most difficult situation you've ever handled?" He took a few seconds before responding, swirling the wine in his glass as if carefully choosing how much to reveal. "A woman who didn't deserve to pay for her husband's mistakes." She observed him in silence. He owed money to people who don't usually have patience. When he died, they thought they could collect from her. His jaw tensioned almost imperceptibly. "That didn't happen. And how did you resolve it?" He held her gaze. "I convinced the right people that there were lines that shouldn't be crossed." The pause was short. "Especially when it involves children." "Did you threaten them?" A slight smile emerged. "I prefer to call it strategic clarification." He tilted his head. "What matters is that she never felt afraid again." Despite the careful phrasing, she could read between the lines. Alessandro had used his influence, his reputation, his connections to protect someone vulnerable. The methods might be questionable, but the result was clearly something he was proud of. "And that's typical of your work? More common than you'd imagine. People assume that unconventional problem-solving always involves harming someone. Usually it's about preventing harm by ensuring the right incentives exist." Incentives. People respond to incentives, Isabella. Sometimes those incentives are financial, sometimes social, and other times they're based on understanding potential consequences. He cut his food with precise movements. "The art is knowing which incentives will be most effective with which people." He set his glass on the table. "I've talked too much about myself." His gaze rested on her with more attention than before. "I want to know what makes you smile like that when you think no one's looking." The pause was subtle. "Your plans, what you want beyond the hospital." The corner of his mouth lifted. "You seem like the type of woman who dreams big. I like to know where I'm stepping, and everything about you interests me." A small smile appeared on her lips. "Maybe I like that you don't know everything about me." She raised her glass, provoking him. Her smile hung suspended in the air between them. He watched her for several seconds too long. When he spoke, his voice no longer had the same strategic calm. "You're playing with someone who doesn't usually lose." The glass was still raised when he gently held her wrist to lower the wine back to the table. Slowly. "And I'm not used to being teased like this." The silence afterward was intense, not uncomfortable, intense. But as the wine progressed, his focus shifted. Less strategy, more attention on her. He was also clearly someone who had principles, boundaries, and a code that regulated how he used his influence. When dinner ended, Isabella realized she was no longer trying to fit him into comfortable categories. He wasn't simply safe, nor clearly dangerous. He was something in between, and perhaps that was what kept her there. Alessandro stood first, approaching to help her with her coat, his fingers lingering a second longer than necessary on the fabric. "Want to see my apartment?" he asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "The view is better than here." A slight smile emerged. "And I promise wine that doesn't need long explanations." The invitation was casual, but she could perceive the implicit question. It wasn't exactly pressure, but a clear offer to extend the night to something more intimate. "I think I should go home," she said, though she realized she actually didn't want the night to end. Should or want to? The distinction was important and both knew it. Want to and should are in conflict, she admitted. Then let's address the conflict directly. His suggestion was gentle and respectful. "Come up for a drink, enjoy the view, continue this conversation in a setting where we don't have to worry about who might be listening. If you're not comfortable, I'll take you home immediately." She studied his face, looking for hidden agendas or manipulation. Instead, she saw genuine interest in spending more time with her, coupled with clear respect for her boundaries. "Just one drink," she agreed. The private elevator opened directly into the living room. Isabella took 2 steps before realizing she had stopped. It wasn't the size of the space that impressed, it was the silence. A loud silence, interrupted only by the distant sound of the city many floors below. The windows occupied practically the entire wall. Chicago spread beneath their feet, alive, pulsing with lights that seemed to breathe in the darkness. She walked to the glass almost without realizing it. "You live within the city, and above it at the same time," she murmured. The apartment didn't scream wealth. It suggested it. Clean lines, dark textures, a piano in one corner, books scattered with too much intention to be careless. Nothing there seemed accidental. And suddenly, she had the strange feeling that this place made too much sense with the man who was silently observing her from behind. "It's beautiful," she said, immediately drawn to the view. "That's why I chose this building." He moved to pour wine, giving her space to explore. "Though I must admit the view is considerably more attractive with you in it." She turned and found his eyes fixed on her. It wasn't a hurried look. It was too attentive, as if he were memorizing something. The air seemed denser between them. "Alessandra, tell me what you're thinking," he said, offering her a wine glass. "About tonight, about what I've told you, about whether you feel comfortable with me, and all the rest." She accepted the wine, extremely conscious of the way his fingers brushed hers during the exchange. "I'm thinking that you're nothing like what I expected when I first saw you in that elevator. Better or worse? More complicated." She went to the window, looking at the city lights. "I spent my entire career learning to make clear distinctions, healthy versus sick, life versus death, right treatment versus wrong treatment. But you seem to exist in a world where those lines are deliberately blurred. Does that bother you?" She turned to study his face, this man who had been carefully revealing himself throughout the evening. "It should bother me more than it does. And why doesn't it? Because despite the ambiguity, despite the careful way you describe your work, I get the sense that you have principles, boundaries, that you don't use your influence capriciously." His smile was warm with something that looked like relief. "I do have principles. They may not align perfectly with legal codes, but they're consistent and matter to me. And where do I fit into those principles?" He didn't answer immediately. He just approached close enough for her to feel his warmth. "You don't fit." His voice came out lower. "You deviate." His gaze slowly descended to her lips before returning. "And I still haven't decided if that's a problem or a temptation." And then he kissed her. It was different from what she expected, soft at first, then deeper as she responded to the controlled passion she felt beneath his careful restraint. His hands traced the contour of her body before settling on her waist, firm enough to make her feel there was no room for retreat. Her fingers closed on his jacket lapels, bringing him even closer, as if the decision had already been made even before the kiss. When they finally separated, the space seemed smaller, not from proximity, but because he kept his hands on the back of her neck, as if he still hadn't decided to let her go. "This is complicated," she whispered. "The best things usually are." His thumb brushed her lips. "The question is whether you're willing to explore this." She observed him, not like someone analyzing a risk, but like someone beginning to accept a desire. He might live in territories she didn't fully understand, but with her there were no doubts, and that was enough. "I think I am," she said softly. His smile wasn't wide, it was certain. "Good." His eyes traveled over her face before returning. "I rarely start something I don't intend to continue." As they stood by the windows overlooking Chicago, Isabella realized that her carefully controlled life was about to become much more complex. But for the first time in years, complexity seemed like a possibility, not a danger. And with Alessandro, she began to think that might be exactly what she needed. Isabella woke to sunlight filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows and the scent of freshly brewed espresso. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she felt her cheeks warm with the memory. Alessandro's penthouse, the wine, the kiss by the windows overlooking Chicago, the way he'd looked at her with that controlled intensity that never quite revealed everything he was thinking. She could hear him moving quietly in the kitchen, speaking in Italian to someone on the phone. His voice was low, authoritative, the tone of a man conducting business even at this early hour. When she emerged from the bedroom, wrapped in the silk robe he'd left for her, she found him at the marble island, phone pressed to his ear. He looked devastatingly handsome in dark slacks and a white shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong forearms, hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. He noticed her immediately, his expression shifting to something warmer but still carefully controlled. He held up one finger, a gentle request for patience as he finished his conversation. "Handle it quietly. No, not today. Monday will be soon enough." His voice carried that familiar edge of authority, reminding her that beneath the charm and attraction, Alessandro operated in a world where his word carried weight, consequences. When he ended the call, he turned to her with a smile that was both welcoming and mysteriously guarded. "Business," he said simply, moving to pour her coffee. "It doesn't stop, unfortunately. Even on Saturday mornings, especially on Saturday mornings, some problems require immediate attention." He handed her the espresso, his fingers brushing hers just long enough to send warmth up her arm. "But you're far more interesting than any business crisis." The compliment was delivered with his characteristic blend of charm and restraint, interested but not desperate, appreciative but not overwhelmed. "Most men would be more attentive the morning after," she observed, testing his reaction. His smile was enigmatic, knowing. "I'm not most men, Isabella, and I suspect that's exactly why you're still here." The accuracy of his assessment sent a flutter through her chest. He was right. His controlled distance, the way he didn't crowd her with expectations or declarations, was exactly what made him so compelling. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the counter. Alessandro glanced at it with mild interest, but made no move to dismiss it. "Hospital?" he asked. "Probably they don't rest either." She checked the message, a routine consultation that could wait, and set the phone aside. "Take it if you need to," he said, already moving toward the kitchen. "I'll make breakfast while you handle whatever crisis requires your expertise." His easy acceptance of her professional demands, the way he made space for her career without making it feel like an inconvenience, was refreshing. But there was something else in his tone, a recognition that her work was important, but also that he was equally comfortable with his own priorities. "It can wait," she said. "Good." He began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator with practiced efficiency. "Because I make excellent eggs, Benedict, and it would be a shame for you to miss it." As she watched him cook, Isabella found herself studying him more carefully. Last night had shown her glimpses of the man behind the mysterious exterior. Passionate, attentive, surprisingly gentle. But this morning, she could see the controlled power returning, the careful composure that never quite let her see everything he was thinking. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" she asked, watching him work with restaurant-quality precision. "Necessity," he said, not looking up from the stove. "When you spend a lot of time in your own space, You learn to take care of yourself properly. It was a non-answer that revealed nothing about family, background, or personal history. Classic Alessandro, engaging without being revealing. They ate breakfast in comfortable conversation, but she noticed how he guided the topics away from anything too personal or future-oriented. He asked about her work, her interests, her thoughts on art and music, but when she tried to learn more about his business or his plans, he deflected with practiced charm. "You're very good at not answering questions," she observed. His smile was genuinely amused. "And you're very good at asking the right ones. It's one of the things I find most intriguing about you." Just intriguing? Among other things. His eyes darkened with memory of the night before, but he didn't elaborate. "Finish your coffee. I'll drive you home so you can get ready for work." The offer was considerate, but also clearly a boundary. He wasn't inviting her to stay longer, wasn't pushing for more time together, wasn't making assumptions about when they'd see each other again. In the elevator down to the parking garage, the space felt charged with unfinished business. Alessandro stood close enough that she could feel his warmth, but he didn't touch her. When the doors opened, he placed a gentle hand on the small of her back, guiding her toward his car. "Alessandro," she said as they reached the Maserati. "Yes?" "Last night was perfect," he finished, moving closer until she was backed against the car. His hands braced on either side of her, trapping her without touching her. "I don't make promises lightly, but when I decide something matters, I don't walk away." The statement was both seductive and warning. He was telling her that whatever this was, it would be on his terms at his pace without guarantees about where it might lead. "I didn't ask for promises." "Good." His smile was sharp with approval. "Because I prefer to let things develop naturally. See where they lead without forcing outcomes." When he kissed her goodbye, it was controlled and thorough, a reminder of what they'd shared without being possessive about what came next. When he pulled away, she felt both satisfied and wanting more. "When will I see you again?" she asked. "Soon, I hope," he said, opening her car door for her. "What do you think about Friday? I have some business to handle this week, but my evenings are yours if you want them." His directness should have made things clearer. Instead, it sent a thrill of anticipation through her. Alessandro Torretti was willing to rearrange his schedule for her, but she still knew so little about what that schedule actually involved, what business he needed to handle. As she drove toward her apartment to change for work, Isabella realized that while he'd answered one question, he'd left dozens of others untouched. He wanted to see her Friday, but the man himself remained as intriguing and impossible to fully understand as ever, and she found herself already looking forward to finding out more. An hour later, Isabella walked through the main entrance of Presbyterian Hospital, still carrying the memory of Alessandro's kiss and the faint scent of his cologne on her skin. The morning felt different somehow. Colors seemed sharper, sounds more distinct. Even her usual pre-surgery routine felt charged with new energy. She was reviewing patient charts when she became aware of the whispers. Saw her getting into that black Maserati. Alessandro Torretti picked her up after the charity gala. Heard they had dinner at Meridian last Friday. Isabella's hand stilled on the chart she was reading. She glanced up to see two nurses at the nearby station, their voices low, but their glances unmistakably directed at her. "Dr. Clark." Sarah Ashworth appeared at her elbow, her expression carefully neutral. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" They walked to a quieter corner of the floor, and Sarah's expression grew more concerned. "Isabella, I'm going to ask this as a friend. Are you involved with Alessandro Torretti?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because half the hospital is talking about it, and because—" Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully. "Because his name comes with complications you might not be prepared for." "What kind of complications?" "The kind where people wonder about your judgment, where hospital administrators start questioning your objectivity, where your professional reputation becomes connected to questions about his business practices." Isabella felt something cold settle in her stomach. his business practices. Look, I don't know what's true and what's gossip, but Alessandro Toretti's name gets mentioned in connection with things that aren't exactly straightforward. And if you're personally involved with him, that affects how people see your professional decisions. Before Isabella could respond, Dr. Fernandez appeared in the hallway. "Dr. Clark, my office. Now." The tone was professional, but ominous. As they walked toward the administrative wing, Isabella felt the weight of stares from colleagues she'd worked with for years. People she'd saved lives alongside were now looking at her differently. In Fernandez's office, the conversation was brief and pointed. "I'm going to be direct," he said, settling behind his desk. "Your personal life has become a topic of professional concern. Alessandro Toretti's associations are not something we want connected to our surgical department." "What associations?" "The kind that make people ask questions about judgment, objectivity, and professional standards." Fernandez leaned forward. "I'm not telling you how to live your life. But I am telling you that some choices come with consequences you might not have considered." As Isabella left his office, she realized that her night with Alessandro had already changed more than just her personal life. Her professional world, her reputation, her relationships with colleagues, her standing in the hospital, was now viewed through the lens of her connection to a man whose influence extended into territories she was only beginning to understand. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent her career being cautious, avoiding complications, maintaining clear boundaries between personal and professional, and with one dinner, one night, one kiss goodbye, Alessandro Toretti had made all of that impossible. But as she walked back toward the surgical wing, feeling the weight of whispers and sideways glances, Isabella found herself thinking not about the risks she was facing, but about the controlled intensity in Alessandro's eyes when he'd told her he preferred to let things develop naturally. Some complications, she realized, were worth navigating, even when you couldn't predict where they might lead. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe for more sophisticated romance where mysterious attraction leads to morning-after revelations, powerful men show their vulnerable sides, and sometimes the best negotiations happen over breakfast in silk robes. Tell me in the comments, would you risk your professional reputation for someone who intrigues you? How much mystery is too much mystery in a relationship?